Why corruption should not be on the ballot on August 9th, 2022. A week to the election, the two major coalitions have said enough for one to broadly describe their platforms. The Azimio la Umoja platform centers on governance and social inclusion. On their website, they identify some of the problems facing the country as, quote, political inclusion, divisive electoral processes, insecurity, corruption, and reviving the economy, end quote. In his foreword, Raila Odinga declares that the manifesto is a, quote, social contract with the people of Kenya, and that it embodies the hopes and aspirations of our people and outlines how they would like the business of government to be conducted on their behalf, end quote. He also, quote, envisions a great thrust into rebooting our country, one not just occasioned through the electoral cycle, but one that heralds a new and distinct way of governance, end quote. The Kenya Kwanza platform centers on the economy and its transformation. The coalition's manifesto is dubbed the Bottom-Up Economic Transformation Agenda 2022 to 2027. The plan identifies a perfect storm of challenges facing the country, namely an external shock of rising inflation and interest rates, fiscal distress, and structural weaknesses and imbalances in the real economy. In his foreword, William Ruto lists his three main agenda as to defend the constitution, to institutionalize politics, and jobs. Despite what appear to be very different platforms, I have detected a bout of cynicism in many people with whom I have discussed the candidates. There is no doubt that cynicism is a chronic feature of the Kenyan psyche, but it seems to me that the disillusionment is more acute this election cycle. It manifests in statements such as, both parties are corrupt, or, regardless of who wins, nothing will change, or, we want the election to end so we can move on with our lives. Again, these are not novel sentiments. They just appear more prevalent this time around. A good number of people I have talked to have decided not to vote or remain undecided. The surprising popularity of quote-unquote unconventional candidates would also be seen as a symptom. One could think of several reasons to explain the situation. The political realignments that took place before this election is one. This is not a new phenomenon in our political space. However, the realignments that occurred this time have engendered more cognitive dissonance than our tortured minds are willing to or are capable of handling. I confess that this particular reason caused me to disengage from political discourse for a while. A second reason could be the lack of an emotive cause or issue to rally people around. Previous such issues have included the ICC indictments, constitutional reforms, among others. Promising to battle corruption and to improve the economy, though very important, do not seem to excite Kenyans anymore, and not without reason. Finally, after the economic catastrophe that was wreaked by COVID lockdowns and the shocks being caused by Western sanctions on Russia, there is a genuine desire for people to get back to the business of building their lives, and for the more cynical ones, a feeling of despair. There is a sense neither political formation is capable of stopping the socio-economic disaster looming over the horizon. All these are valid reasons. The danger with cynicism is that it prevents any attempt at critical analysis of the options that we have been given. Consequently, it may lead to many missed opportunities. If in my eyes there is no difference between the choices before me, I may decide to pick neither, or I may decide to pick one based on ungrounded reasons. We are therefore more likely to fall back on our basest instincts such as ethnic chauvinism or to give up hope altogether. This is no better than fanaticism, as both of them show a disconnection from reality. It is my opinion that no other issue has been exploited more than corruption in order to breed the hopelessness that many people now feel. In Kenya, corruption is the cause of all our problems, but it cannot be defeated. Hii ni Kenya, we say when faced with yet another scandal. We move. Perhaps the culmination of this disillusionment was when the outgoing head of state despaired, declaring to us, mnataka nifanye nini? Not even those wielding the instruments of state power can tame the beast that is corruption. After all, it is carried out by nameless and faceless individuals called quote-unquote cartels or tenderpreneurs who operate in the quote-unquote corridors of power. Every now and then, one of these shadowy characters is brought to light, but we are often left feeling that these are red herring or scapegoats meant to keep the true masterminds in the shadows. There are consequences to this preoccupation with corruption, especially in the way that we have been trained to identify it, such as procurement fraud and political kickbacks. One of the consequences is that the nature of solutions available to us becomes extremely limited. We become obsessed with personalities, looking for that one among us that is without sin. We say that the laws and policies required to transform Kenya into a more habitable country exist, and that all we need are the right people to midwife the change. Like clockwork, however, we end up disappointed after every election cycle. Perhaps there is none worthy among us. We have come to accept that this is a fatal design flaw in Kenyans and have resorted to condemning all citizens as deserving of the leaders they get. Our musical artists implore us to soul search, to jiangalie. This incompatibility between reality and imagined solutions is particularly devastating to the egos of the upper and middle class citizens, as it is usually they who can afford to make political decisions based on values or ideology. Based on these values, they create an image in real life or otherwise, one that needs to be defended at all costs. Abandoning this image is tantamount to a loss of identity, and without these borders to define the edges of their selves, they would just dissolve into the void. Given the influence that this demographic has on our political discourse, it is no wonder that a lot of campaign news coverage has consisted of splitting hairs on why one side of the political divide is less corrupt than the other. Behind all this nitpicking, however, is an attempt at self-preservation. The complexity of this calculus has plunged many of them into this cynicism I describe. Many continue to support their candidates despite clear evidence that these candidates only pay lip service to what they profess. Others refuse to abandon their values and opt not to vote. I empathize because I have been there myself. I also do not seek to absolve poorer members of society of any responsibility. It is my opinion, however, that they are more likely to be understanding of the choices that politicians make. They know that with the kind of society we have built in Kenya, one is often forced to abandon one's values, or whatever remains of them, in order to survive. Their motivations are more likely to be grounded in reality than those of their wealthier compatriots. Nevertheless, they too tend to get carried away by the issues that mainstream media decides are worthy of our attention. A few weeks ago, before the two most popular candidates picked their running mates, and before the thoughts in this article crystallized for me, I told my friend that I believed William Ruto should pick Kithure Kindiki as his running mate. I also told him that I didn't think he was brave enough to make that choice. According to many media reports, Professor Kindiki was the most popular choice for those in Ruto's inner circle. Ruto's decision to pick Rigathi Gachagua confirmed to me that he was a coward, unable to unshackle himself from tyranny of numbers, politics, and other cynical calculations. To be fair to my friend, an Azimio supporter, he was also disappointed by Raila Odinga's pick of Martha Karua. According to him, this perpetuated the idea that Mount Kenya West is the most important constituency in the country. The media had billed the choice of running mate as the determining factor in this election, and to say that we were both dismayed is an understatement. It was while watching a recent interview of Dr. David Ndei, economic advisor to Kenya Kwanza, on Spice FM that I realized that there may be hope after all. In this interview, David discusses topics such as why he ditched NASA and joined Kenya Kwanza, the reasons why the outgoing president and his deputy fell out, and of course the manifesto. According to David, Ruto started facing resistance from Uhuru Kenyatta when he tried to implement projects that undermined the economic interests of the Kenyatta family empire. He goes on to say that the nickname Hustler, which William Ruto has made his own, was given him by the president. It was meant to be derogatory, to show him that he does not belong among the economic elite of this country. I encourage you to watch the interview yourself and also leave to your discretion how much salt you choose to consume with it. In my case, these insights helped me come to some conclusions. First, in William Ruto, we might have for the first time in a long time a presidential candidate whose interests go against those of the economic elite to the extent that these elite are represented by Uhuru Kenyatta and his allies. As you may have inferred from what I have said this far, I believe that the word corruption has by design become too hackneyed and muddled a term to describe what ails Kenya. This is not to say that corruption should not be ignored. Rather, it is to say that it is an inadequate term that only scratches the surface and prevents meaningful change. I shall give an example. Raphael Tuju, executive director of Azimio la Umoja, recently claimed that William Ruto was paid to the tune of 10 billion shillings in order to support Uhuru Kenyatta. If true, this is an astonishing claim that deserves our attention. It calls into question the character of William Ruto and highlights the role that money plays in our politics. In their reactions to this bombshell, Kenyans observe that the parties on either side of this transaction should be sanctioned. Hard to disagree. Here is what I believe would be a more helpful line of thought, however. How does one have 10 billion Kenya shillings lying around to be used to bribe another in a country where people die of malnourishment? The answer is perhaps straightforward in this instance, given the characters involved. Other questions we could ask are, how many people can stand by their values when faced with a similar offer? If incentives such as these exist, is it any wonder that all our elected officials opt to line up at the feeding trough once they are sent to power? This example both shows the extent to which economic elites have rigged the economy to amass wealth and the lengths to which they will go to preserve the status quo. It is this phenomenon that Kenya Kwanza refers to as state capture. Can we be sure that Raila Odinga, given the circumstances of their union, was not offered a similar amount or more by Uhuru Kenyatta? To end corruption on this scale requires a total restructuring of our political economy. It requires somebody whose interests are diametrically opposed to those of the self-appointed owners of this country and by definition align with those of the exploited many. I would like to highlight another incident that I believe to be instructive in this discussion. I am referring to the Kenyatta University land saga. As soon as I familiarized myself with the facts as presented in the news, I wondered why Uhuru Kenyatta was willing to risk such negative PR just a few weeks to an election, particularly one in which he had a preferred successor and whose platform centered on fighting corruption, impunity, and abuse of power. Does he assume that most people are already decided on their preferred candidate and are unlikely to be swayed by such actions? What is so important about this development that he was ready to commit such a blatant contravention of the law and dispossess generations of university students while at it? If he was willing to do this at such a critical juncture, might we witness a continuation of the same after the presidency has been delivered to his preferred candidate? According to him, the government was well within its rights to do what they felt was beneficial for Kenyans. That may well be true. However, this could not explain the ferocity with which he treated the governing officials of the university. His attitude towards corruption does not signal one who is that passionate about public service. Perhaps he had already promised the World Health Organization and the African CDC their 40 acres and could not afford to lose face? Maybe. But what if there was an even more personal reason? What if the establishment of the WHO and CDC hubs will have positive economic spillover effects on a certain Kenyatta family-owned real estate development not too far away from there? Conjecture? Perhaps. Impossible? I don't think so. State capture works like it. Second, the choice of running mate was indeed significant. The choices show that Ruto made the brave choice while Odinga made the cowardly one. For Ruto to pick Professor Kindiki would have been to capitulate to this idea that corruption is the biggest challenge in Kenya. I had been of the opinion that Professor Kindiki would make the Kenya Kwanza ticket more palatable, less tainted by graft. In hindsight, this would have been suicidal for Ruto. It would have been an implicit admission that he was a corrupt politician who needed to be shielded by his running mate. It would also have made Kindiki corrupt by association, as he would not have escaped the corruption allegations that seem to always accompany William Ruto. Being a politician, I am sure Ruto considered other factors before settling on Gachagua. Gachagua is a Kikuyu with great mobilization skills and administrative experience. It is my opinion, however, that the biggest benefit of this choice was that it allowed Ruto to stay on his message of economic transformation and avoid the distraction cost of focusing on corruption. Odinga's choice of mother, on the other hand, betrayed a lack of conviction and a rather vacuous attempt to allay the disenchantment of his supporters. Picking a woman was especially targeted at the aforementioned upper and middle class demographic who are likely to abandon him for his choice to partner with Uhuru Kenyatta despite his poor anti-corruption credentials. It is this demographic that is liable to be enchanted by the idea of shattered glass ceilings. It is another value they can identify with. To be fair, Mother Karua has done enough to be considered a reformer. What makes this choice extremely cynical, in my opinion, is the history that these two have, especially surrounding the contested 2007 elections. While not true for the Kenyan political class, elections are often a matter of life and death for the electorate. They change some people into killers and others into corpses. As a supporter of the 2013 Uhuru and Ruto ticket, far be it from me to condemn this sort of marriage of convenience. As a now more enlightened observer of Kenyan politics, however, I can't help but wonder whether Odinga's supporters are as willing to forgive and forget as quickly as he is. With his choice, Ruto displayed resolve, while Odinga opted for virtue signaling. It may not be easy to accept the potentialities of a Kenya Kwanza administration. It may come more easily to some than to others. William Ruto and his running mate have their baggage. Because I have supported him before, those who know me may say that they didn't expect any different. They would only be partially right. Partially because I have also suffered from this cynicism I describe. In the run-up to the election, I have found few positive things to say about either coalition. With a cursory look at their manifestos, however, I believe we can find another convincing reason as to why a Kenya Kwanza administration may be better. There are those that argue that manifestos are political gimmicks that often have no bearing on the policies that governments go on to implement once elected. Furthermore, they remain inaccessible to the masses because of issues such as literacy. For this reason, some argue that we should not pay much attention to manifestos. While I am sympathetic to these arguments, I remain convinced that the manifestos have an intended audience. Otherwise, they would not be done at all. In the Azimio manifesto, Odinga claims that an Azimio government would be a fresh start, one that is heralded by people coalescing around, quote unquote, an idea whose time has come. What this idea is not explicitly stated. Either way, accepting this idea, presented as a historical inevitability, is the way to, quote unquote, an awakening of the people. Kenyans have to change before Kenya can change. This is a message that the upper and middle classes are sympathetic to. As beneficiaries of the system, they believe that the challenges therein are just bugs that can be fixed if we get better leaders. In reality, Azimio promises more of the same that got the country where it is, only that it is shrouded in progressive language. For instance, the Azimio la Uwajibikaji promises to, quote, improve on the gains that have been made by the administrations that came before and not to start afresh. Good governance, they say, will, quote, help ensure that all the gains of the economic revolutions are secured and that the environment is even more conducive for productivity and investments, end quote. What and whose economic revolution are they talking about? The Azimio la Wananchi acknowledges that, quote, instruments of power do not change and only the custodians come and go, end quote. As custodians, Odinga and Karua promise to highlight their priorities and agenda and, quote, align it with the gains already secured by previous administrations on behalf of the people, end quote. I could go on, but it is clear that the more things change, the more they remain the same. This manifesto's intended audience are the main beneficiaries of the status quo. Its purpose is to signal to them that no radical changes will be made and that their interests will remain protected. Does this sound like it will stop corruption? In the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, Ruto articulates concrete issues that he believes will secure change for Kenya: empowering the judiciary, institutionalizing politics through quote-unquote national democratic political parties, and creating jobs by revising our quote-unquote economic model. The bottom-up solution is explained as a quote commitment to invest 500 billion shillings over the next 5 years in smallholder agriculture and the informal sector, and a commitment to end exclusion and criminalization of livelihoods and level the playing field for all investors, big and small, end quote. The message is clearly targeted at lower-class citizens who form the majority. People-powered institutions such as cooperatives feature prominently. For instance, they commit to use the SACCO system to distribute affordable credit, thereby protecting poor people from predatory lending, and also promise to organize waste collectors into cooperatives. The Kenya Kwanza plan recognizes that our economic structures have to change before the people can change. Criminalization of livelihoods and an economy, quote, structured in ways that channel capital and other resources to the top of the pyramid, end quote, can only sire corruption. This manifesto addresses the causes rather than the symptoms of corruption. Besides the implications on corruption, the language used and issues emphasized in these manifestos are insightful in other ways. The notion of an idea whose time has come is a dangerous one. Who decides what the idea is? Suppose they decide the idea is that Kenya is ready for the first female deputy president. Suppose I cannot support Karoa for the role she played in 2008 or because she took campaign money from tobacco companies. Does that make me a misogynist? Does it make me an anti-Luo chauvinist if I feel that an Odinga presidency is an idea whose time has passed rather than one whose time has come? That he has hung around the political scene long enough to become a villain? In order for us to cure ourselves of cynicism before this election, we have to disabuse ourselves of the idea that corruption and poor governance are the main challenges we face as a country. In his book, Worshipping Power, Peter Galdalu says that, quote, progressive movements systematically redirect popular rage, which is inspired by nothing less than the violence of being governed, at elements of power that are ineffective and potentially obsolete. The goal, at least of those who command such movements, and the result is to make power more powerful. Progressives' favorite whipping boy has long been corruption, but corruption is the last vestige of humanity in an increasingly inhuman system. End quote. A society as unequal, unforgiving, and exploitative as ours is bound to breed corruption. We feel it every time the matatu driver greases the policeman's hands, and all we can muster are resigned murmurs because we'd rather not get late for work. We know it because connections, quote unquote, are the only way some of us could get our jobs. Without corruption, some of us would be in prison for the most harmless of crimes. To accept that corruption is the root of all our problems is to accept that we are irredeemably flawed. It is to consent to our own dehumanization. It is to let those who have gouged out our eyes reproach us for our blindness.